Hi, thanks so much for joining us on the Sisterhood Coalition today, where we are unpacking 3 biblical end time prophecies that we are seeing happening right here, right now. Please stay with us. So what are the 3 biblical end time prophecies that we are seeing happening right now? We are going to unpack this today, and Val has a lot of really great information to share with us. So I'm going to turn this over to her so she can kind of chat with us a little bit about what we're seeing in news headlines and whatnot.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. I'll ask you ladies too, like, what do you see going on around us that is like putting up red flags? And it seems like since, a couple years ago, some red flags have been going up that things are kind of starting to form and come together. And, watching Israel news a lot and trying to keep up on that. Like 2 of us out of this 3 group are Lebanese Americans. And so we try to have interest in what's happening in the Middle East. And, biblical prophecy is based all around what's happening in the Middle East. And so we've seen, since May, actually some really big things happening that if you're not aware of what's going on in the Middle East, you may not be aware of where we kind of are on the prophetic timeline. And if you are aware of these, it should excite you as a Christian, because we believe here in this group that we're not going to be here to see a lot of this, but some of this is starting to form. And, these prophecies were from almost 3,000 years ago, from Daniel, and there's even Psalms. This is God's hand moving, and so we don't need to be in fear. And so we're going to talk about all of those things today. But you guys, what are kind of some of the things that are putting up red flags for you?
Well, I think for a lot of people, just in the last few years, we're seeing just natural disasters. We're seeing plagues, right? We're seeing the coronavirus this isn't just happening in one country or another like it has over time. This is a worldwide plague that has affected everybody. And so we're seeing stuff like this. We're seeing, natural disasters happening closer and closer together. And then, like you said, everything that's surrounding Israel right now is really eye-opening. That's starting to line up with Ezekiel 38 and the Gog and Magog war, and how we're starting to see, Israel has been enjoying peace since, we had talked about like the 40s. It's been enjoying peace for this really long period of time. And now we're seeing, whoa, airstrikes, poor Israel, like what is happening? Like they are under attack. And all of this is lining up with prophecy that we are seeing in Ezekiel 38 and the Gog and Magog war, and how the surrounding countries are forming coalitions and things to attack Israel. So I think that's a big one that's been exciting to watch.
Yeah, we definitely have been feeling what they call in the Bible the birth pains, right? And those of us, all 3 of us have children, and we know exactly how that goes. We start feeling the movements, and then we start feeling them closer together and the contractions, and then suddenly it changes, so like I think that's exciting for us Christians that we're getting so many red flags so quickly together, so that we can look up for our redemption draws nigh. We'll talk about the coalitions kind of coming together too.
Yeah. Well, Val, what do you feel like that first sign is then that we're seeing right now?
I don't know if there's a first sign, but I feel like the multiple signs are what's getting stronger and more intense. Like you guys talked about the natural disasters. There's been the huge earthquake that we just read about in Haiti. There's flooding in numerous places. There's tremendous drought all over the world. The Euphrates is drying up, which has significance for the Gog and Magog war, where they're going to be able to march through that, which was once the Euphrates, into the land that they're going to attack from the north. So there's some things like that are happening that are really exciting. But the 3 that people always the 2 that people always talk about, and one that's not so mentioned, we're going to talk about a little bit. So the easiest one to talk about for me is Isaiah 17. And this is just the oracle concerning Damascus, that it will be completely uninhabitable. So verse 1 says, an oracle concerning Damascus. See, Damascus will no longer be a city, but will become a heap of ruins. And then it talks about how it will be deserted and left to the flocks and that whole area. So what happened in May, I was actually waiting for the headline, Damascus uninhabitable, because if you remember, Syria, so Damascus is the capital of Syria. Damascus is one of the oldest, if not the oldest, city in the world. So rockets were flying from Damascus into Israel, and the IDF find like thousands of rockets over a couple weeks. That the Iron Dome was just intercepting. And finally the IDF under Netanyahu said this is enough and started firing rockets back. And they were hitting right around Damascus. And so I was just waiting for the headline, honestly, and I'm surprised that it didn't come, but just the increase of conflict in that area. So Iran has basically come in, and Russia, with their troops, and they are occupying Syria. So the poor Syrian people and the people on the Gaza Strip there, they're really in a bad situation because Iran has sort of put its proxies there and firing into Israel. And that is Hamas, which is a terrorist organization. And they have completely said, we are here for the annihilation of Israel and Jews and Zionism. And so the leader of Hamas, which is Mahmoud Abbas, he has said these things. So we know what their intention is. We know what their goal is. And so that's kind of one that I've been keeping my eye on. Did you guys hear a lot about the rockets coming through in that time frame this summer?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's like those airstrikes that I was talking about, that, that seemed to come out of nowhere, right? It was like Israel was enjoying peace, and then all of a sudden we're seeing these headlines that just these crazy amounts of airstrikes were coming down on Israel. Mm-hmm. And so, yes, that was huge, eye-opening. Like, wow, is this it? And like you said, is Damascus going to be destroyed? Is it going to be uninhabitable? We're still waiting for that, but yeah, definitely.
The tension in that area is crazy. Yeah. And now, Iran has they were in trouble, financial trouble, honestly. They were next to bankrupt, and then China came in and they made diplomatic ties with the supreme leader there, and it's for 25 years. And so they'll have financial support from China. So we can already see in Iran and China diplomatic relationships there and economic relationships, which is leading up to the Ezekiel 38, which you mentioned. So the Gog and Magog. So there's supposed to be a 10-nation coalition, that wars against Israel, right? So if you read, it talks about how these different places, and I'll go over what they are, will turn, that God will put a hook in their mouth, in their jaw, and bring you out with your whole army, your horses, your horsemen. But we know that at the end of this message, this chapter, when they invade the land from the nations of the north, you'll advance against Israel, my people. I will show myself holy through you before your eyes. And there will be a great earthquake, and I will execute judgment with plague and bloodshed. I will pour down torrents of rain, hailstones, burning sulfur on him and his troops, and on many nations with him. So we're going to talk about these many nations. And I'll show my greatness and holiness and make myself known in the sight of many nations, and they'll know that I'm the Lord. So this is, if we are pre-trib, we won't be here to see this. But this is going to be quite the sight to see. And the whole purpose of this is to show that Yahweh, God of Israel, is great and glorified, and there's none like him, and he's going to take out nations. So they talk about this 10-nation coalition. So Rosh is Russia, and that would be the king of the north. Daniel 11 talks about it, as well as obviously Ezekiel 38, verse 6. Tubal is Turkey. Persia is Iran. Ethiopia is Sudan and Ethiopia. Libya, which is interesting to me because right now Libya is in economic agreement with Israel through the Abraham Accords. So at some point they're going to have to flip-flop sides, which is interesting. I've been keeping my eye kind of on Libya a little bit more, and Germany. And then it talks about the four kings that are going to come. So the king from the north is Russia, and the king from the south is Egypt, or Islamic nations. Okay, so you have to keep that in mind when you're thinking about who are these people coming to fight against Israel. It's a lot of the Arab nations around there that have claimed jihad against Israel. And then the east is China, which you just talked about how they've made diplomatic ties with Iran. And then the king of the west is the Antichrist. So these huge powerhouses, Russia and China and all of the Arab world right around there, that haven't made diplomatic ties with Israel, with the exception of Libya. That's huge. Like those are big nations that are going to be marching against Israel.
I think it's interesting too, because so in Ezekiel 38, it's talking about how God is going to put a hook in their jaw and pull them through. So God is actually provoking this. Okay. So God's going to provoke this to happen because this is within his timeline. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really interesting because Russia has the incentive of wanting to go into Israel for oil. It's like they all have different incentives as to why they want to take out Israel. And so now we're like seeing all of these, surrounding countries coming in, closing on Israel because they're not protected.
Yeah, I think you make a good point. Israel used to get a lot of their oil from Saudi Arabia, but they've cut a lot of ties there, even though they're an economic agreement, because they found huge oil reserves in Israel recently. Yeah. So that could be the hook. Some other people that I've heard, they've talked about technology, how that could be the hook, because they are huge in technology, this little sliver, how it affects the whole rest of the world in terms of technology and economic benefits. So yeah, it could definitely be something like that.
Yeah, it's super interesting.
So every one of these mentioned is an Islamic nation. All the ones around it, the Turkey and the Sudan and Ethiopia, they're Sunni or Shiite in their Muslim religion, that they are coming against very, very forcefully against Israel, which is their goal. These prophecies indicate that Israel will have serious problems with these Islamic nations. And I told you that Russia has a presence now in Iran and Syria, and Russia having its presence in all these different places, and Iran having their presence in all these surrounding places, you have to think about these are the people who want to severely make a coalition and come against Israel. And we're seeing those treaties and those ties, and it's very interesting. And here's a prophecy that we don't often talk about. So this is Psalm, I'm sorry, I think maybe I lost my place. Psalm 83 talks about a different kind of coalition that comes against Israel, and it's not been fulfilled up to this time, and it's different than Gog and Magog. So it says, verse 4 in chapter 83, "Come, they say, let us destroy them as a nation, that the name of Israel will be remembered no more. With one mind they plot together and form an alliance against you, the tents of Edom, and the Ishmaelites of Moab, and the Hagarites, and Gebal, Ammon, Amalek, Philistia, and the people of Tyre. Even Assyria has joined them to lend strength to the descendants of Lot." So I have a screen here that Tana will put up, and these are the different groups. And basically what you're going to see here is that it's Lebanon, it's Syria, it's Egypt, it's Iraq, it's all the nations surrounding Israel, but these are just Arab peoples. So descendants of Ishmael, right? Not descendants of Jacob. So there's almost like a descendant battle or something there that's going to take place, which is very interesting, because now Lebanon has just started firing missiles into Israel. So not only do we have Hamas from the north, we have Hezbollah, we have ISIS, we have Taliban, we have Al Qaeda, all of these groups popping up again now that Biden is in office, and they want to take control. They're eagerly rallying support from each other for war against Israel. And at the end of this chapter, you will also see a supernatural stepping in of the Lord. That these are different areas than the places previously listed. It doesn't include Iran. It doesn't include Libya and Ethiopia. It's a lot the neighboring countries that are not in diplomatic ties right now with Israel, and they are jihadist group, which is interesting to see that all of these places basically surround Israel, but that God will come in and have like a supernatural dealing with them again. And you see anti-Semitism growing and growing and growing, especially in Europe. People are being murdered on the streets. It's just this crazy anti-Semitism, and we see it here happening in the United States. You know, a lot of people's hearts are turning from Israel, which is unfortunate, because those who bless Israel will be blessed, those who curse Israel will be cursed. And we see a lot of that going on. So those are kind of the three big prophetic things that I see kind of coming into play is the Hamas and jihadist groups setting up for Psalm 83. And then obviously what we've seen, the air fire happening in Damascus, and then obviously the Gog and Magog war, things are already coming into alignment there. And so we just have to say, how long, O Lord? Lift up our eyes, for our redemption draws nigh.
Yeah, I agree. And that was kind of what I was going to end with too, is 1 Peter 4:13. It says, rejoice in as much as you participate in the sufferings of Christ, so that you may be overjoyed when his glory is revealed. And that's what we have our hope in, is that his glory will be revealed in these times. And like you were saying with that scripture in Psalms, it's like this all has to happen so that God is shown and his glory is revealed. So it's such an amazing thing. So guys, thank you so much for joining us. If you like and enjoyed this, we have a link up here. It's going to be our next video. It's, as Christians, should I be excited or in fear of these end times? And that's such a profound question, because we can get very fearful. But like we've said now, we have a hope in what's coming. So God bless you guys today, and we will talk to you very soon. All right, bye.